well-known feature of operas by the German composer Richard Wagner is his use of repeating musical tags called Leitmotifs or leading motives. A reason often given for them is that when a dramatic moment is tied to an identifiable passage of music, its use later on recalls the earlier action without the need for the characters on stage to say so explicitly. But Wagner himself didn't like the term leading motive. In fact, he distanced himself from it in a statement published in 1879. Here he was being critical of a follower named Hans von Wolzogen, who was hugely successful in marketing leitmotivic handbooks, which prepared audiences before they attended a Wagner opera. But what did the composer have against leading motives? He did make use of the word motif for a short musical phrase, as well as other words like theme and musical moment. So it must have been the idea of leading something in the leitmotif that Wagner found objectionable. In other words, the idea that his music merely pointed to a dramatic action was something he must have found unbearably crude, something that betrayed his artistic intentions. Now, Wagner composed dramatic stage works with music from the late 1830s until his final work, Parsifal, in 1882. So it stands to reason that he changed his mind about how his recurrent musical themes functioned over the course of his long career. What's so special about Wagner is that, unlike other opera composers, he also wrote all of his own opera texts, or poems, for his dramas, as he later called them. That means he was able to ponder the role of music at an early stage in the opera's conception. For example, when describing his compositional method to a journalist in 1844 regarding his opera Tannhäuser, he reports that he had all the characteristic motives in his head before even sketching out a scene. These characteristic motives are clearly not leitmotifs pointing to dramatic actions. Instead, they suggest that the drama emerges from a set of musical metaphors for various characters, and each motif displays distinctive features evoked by personages and their dilemmas. Regarding his next opera, Lohengrin, Wagner makes mention of a musical theme for the forbidden question and calls it a reminiscence of Lohengrin's prohibition, which has hitherto been clearly imprinted upon us. So if a musical reminder of a prohibition has been clearly imprinted upon us, this implies that the understanding of the music was meant to be wholly conscious for the audience. Later still, in writing about the relations between music and text, in what would become his four-evening extravaganza, The Ring of the Nibelung, Der Ring des Nibelungen, Wagner writes about melodic moments of presentiment and reminiscence, music that both foreshadows and recalls the poetic verses. But even when these unspeakable emotions and gestures are attached to the drama, they can't really be called leading motives because, as Wagner writes, they're not to be heard at all, not in their mechanical presence, but only in their organic operative effect at one with the drama. So if these moments aren't meant to be heard as distinct musical items, then they obviously can't lead anywhere either. Coming out of these and other changes in Wagner's views, I'm interested in what happens if we abandon the word leitmotif altogether. Instead, I'd like to work out how, over the course of his life, Wagner crafted a set of ever-varying methods with which to bind music to language, image, gesture, and feeling. To begin the research, I've chosen to focus on Wagner's last romantic opera, Lohengrin, which premiered in 1850. Although the density of thematic reiterations in Lohengrin is less striking than in Wagner's later works, the 14 themes and motives, transformed repeatedly over more than one scene, are absolutely fundamental to the dramatic effect of the opera. And that's true from the very first bars of the prelude that you heard in the opening credits until the final moments of Act 3. In a letter from 1850 about Lohengrin, Wagner even describes the centrality of how, in composing operas, he works out the most deeply felt and necessarily essential motives. And that's why a focus on these deeply felt motives in Lohengrin helps us confront a Wagner at a crucial stage in his artistic development. To help clarify what Wagner was up to in this opera, I've worked with colleagues at the University of Oxford E-Research Centre to develop an iPad app called the Lohengrin TimeMachine. The app has been designed to do two things. First, it accompanies and illustrates my own commentary on Lohengrin in the form of an online musicological essay. With references to the app in a bar along the right side of the essay, this represents a cutting-edge way to read an article in historical musicology. But the app also has a second purpose, and that is as a standalone resource that helps any listener explore the significance of musical recurrences in this wonderful Wagner opera. How would it be, I asked myself, if one could imagine the ease of time travel through a Wagner opera via its themes and motives? Not just seeing the relevant bits of the score in musical notation, but also being able to hear each one in context with a clip from an audio recording. How would it be to zoom around among all of these themes so as to compare them, link them to the words sung by the singers, and to the composer's stage directions, both in the original German and in English translation? How would it be to be able to depict and analyze how Wagner colored each appearance of a theme through subtle changes of harmony, melody, and orchestration? Not only that, I also wondered how one could link each musical iteration of a motive or theme to a commentary, as well as to historical documents that mention them specifically. This is what the Lohengrin TimeMachine sets out to display and manipulate. And it turned out to be quite an interesting challenge, both for the underlying software and design, as well as for forms of music analytical representation. In the first version of the TimeMachine app, which you can explore now, you'll find that we've concentrated on just one of Wagner's themes, the forbidden question, or the Frageverbot in German. In future, we'll expand the app to encompass all 14 themes and motives in the opera. In total, this amounts to around 133 distinct thematic iterations over the course of the opera. I'll now be accessing the app as I explain what a close look at a Wagner theme or motive can reveal about its character and dramatic complexion within the opera. The music for the Frageverbot is a good place to begin because the entire plot of Lohengrin turns on a forbidden question that the protagonist Ilze must not ask. Soon after his appearance in Act 1, Lohengrin tells Ilze, "Never shall you ask me, nor trouble yourself to know where I came from, my name or my ancestry." In the case of the Frageverbot, we're talking about a theme initially sung by the title character. So the relation between words and music is also of special interest. The Frageverbot comprises two musical segments I've called X and Y. And throughout the opera, Wagner sounds the Frageverbot a total of 18 times. Only in the first two utterances does Lohengrin sing the text to the melody of the theme. Elsewhere, it appears only in the orchestra. Another character may refer to the forbidden question, or more typically, the orchestra will simply sound it, somewhat like the members of a disembodied Greek chorus who experience the emotional significance of what's happening on stage. Although in English we say the forbidden question, in the German original, the semantic accent of the Frageverbot is on the prohibition, literally the question ban. This distinction is important because the text is clearly a command in the imperative and not a question. Ilze has been wrongly accused of murdering her brother, and Lohengrin has arrived to aid a damsel in distress. He offers his protection to defend her, though, on one condition, namely that she never ask about his true identity. So we go to the app which shows the text and translation for Frageverbot 1. Nie sollst du mich befragen, noch Wissenssorge tragen, woher ich kam der Fahrt, noch wie mein Nam und Art. Never shall you ask me, nor trouble yourself to know whence I came, my name or my kind. You can see that the X segment occurs twice, followed by the Y segment for the last two lines, which happens to be 2 times as long. Let's listen to the first occurrence of the Frageverbot as Lohengrin sings it. In segment X, as you can hear, Lohengrin declaims each word of the text syllabically over a static harmony. Here we can see the musical notation in the app. Here's X. And X again. And Y. First, by setting the segment twice in an unchanging way, the composer creates the sense that the words are virtually chiseled into the music. This unchanging stone-like feature of the harmony also evokes an utterance issued by a divine authority. Lohengrin is told to accent his words, and in so doing he highlights the oracular and negative side of the command, beginning with the long notes over the words never and neither. The harmonic stasis in the orchestra, sticking to just one chord, is a rather primitive musical device, and by refraining from movement, the harmony cleverly insists on inaction, as if crying out, "Don't do it." Now let's consider the Y segment, and we might as well listen to the second iteration of the Frageverbot. We can actually hear the recorded music on the app while having access to several different views. The best view for us now will be the score with the box showing the theme and segments next to the text and English translation. As you listen to Frageverbot 2, try to spot the stylistic difference between the X and Y segments. Lohengrin's text for the Y segment of the music spells out exactly what Ilze mustn't ask. But here, the musical register suddenly veers from shouting an order to preaching a moral lesson. Lohengrin's vocal accents have vanished, and the harmony in the orchestra wanders through a shifting tonal progression, as if a choir were singing a chorale. There is even a hint of the holiness of this chorale embedded into the progression, where we pick up on a subtle reference to a classical Amen, heard in the embedded plagal cadence formed between two of the chords. Lohengrin, as we only learn in Act 3, once he reveals himself in his narration, is a knight of the kingdom of the Holy Grail. And this Holy Grail, the subject of the music in the Act 1 prelude, ends with a snippet of the Grail theme, underscoring its sanctity by means of yet another plagal Amen cadence. Amen. The Y segment also exhibits a gentle side to Lohengrin's character by tracing wavier melodic contours. Even though he's a hero, Lohengrin makes his first appearance on stage not on a knightly steed, but in a modest boat drawn by a swan. In fact, the first thing he does is to offer thanks and bid a tender farewell to his dear swan. The Y segment, unlike the stern X segment, suggests this in the same tender and legato musical register. Only on its final chord does Wagner compose a mild jolt. Instead of remaining in the more somber minor mode, he brings in a major harmony, or tierce de Picardie, at the end of the passage. So this is what it would be like in minor, and it really goes into this tierce de Picardie. This reminds us that the Frageverbot remains a command, and a command requires an exclamation point. This relation between music and text raises an interesting point. Whereas the literary register of Wagner's words comprises a stern prohibition specifying 3 components, Wagner's music marks a radical shift in style between segments X and Y. So his music doesn't merely translate the band into sound, it rather fabricates an elaborate scenic design for the textual rhetoric, and even wraps the singer in 2 different costumed fabrics, one hard, the other soft. Even with its rudimentary musical materials, you can see already at this first appearance that the Frageverbot is rich in semantic signals. What's fascinating is that Wagner doesn't cast these musical passages as static musical objects, but constantly transforms them throughout the opera to forge links to yet other symbolic realms. One shift concerns the harmonic key area in which the theme is heard. The Frageverbot belongs to a class of themes in Lohengrin that signify the Grail kingdom. For these themes, Wagner makes a point of locating them all in the regions of A or A flat. This means that Wagner intuits that we'll hear all these themes as belonging to the same notional space. So, for example, the themes or motives for the Grail, Swan, and Lohengrin are all located here. In fact, the Swan motif is actually embedded inside the Grail. So here's the Grail. And here's the Swan. Swan. In the opera, Lohengrin's adversary is the pagan noblewoman Ortrud. And, spoiler alert, she turns out to be the actual evildoer behind the mysterious disappearance of Ilze's brother Gottfried. To capture Ortrud in music, Wagner goes out of his way to locate her two associated themes a third lower than the Grail motifs in the realm of F-sharp minor. These are havoc and temptation, Unheil and Versuchung. Havoc. And temptation. Ortrud has to persuade Ilze to ask the forbidden question, and she instills doubt in Ilze, insinuating that Lohengrin's prohibition is actually a result of evil magic. Once she levels these false charges in the second act, the orchestra cloaks the soundings of the Frageverbot in Ortrud's gloomier realm of F-sharp minor or F minor. We can hear this in 5 of the later iterations, 3, 4, 6, 8, and 9. The time machine allows us to experience the effect of these downward transposed statements in a variety of dramatic situations. Let's juxtapose Frageverbot 6 and 8 on the app and play the audio excerpts. You'll note at once the darker quality of these iterations compared to the initial statement of the prohibition. Once attuned to these musical transformations, their power is experienced in a much more profound way than before. The time machine also shows another little transformed detail that has probably escaped the notice of even the most dyed-in-the-wool Wagnerian. Can you perhaps hear it in the 9th iteration of the Frageverbot? Let's go to the app and locate Frageverbot 9. How has Wagner changed the opening of the theme? Beginning a bit before, in Act 2, Scene 5, Wagner has started appending a little anticipatory semiquaver, or 16th note, upbeat, to the X fragment. Instead of beginning on a downbeat that recalls Lohengrin's first word, nie, or never, the orchestra sounds the opening of an ominous brass fanfare. Ta-da! We can also consult Wagner's stage direction here on the app. Ilze glances apprehensively down the right side of the steps and sees Ortrud, who has raised her arm as if she were sure of victory. Wagner actually mentioned this passage in a letter to Franz Liszt, the conductor at the premiere of Lohengrin, and refers to the music as a reminiscence. We can also consult this document on the Time Machine. But if a reminiscence is meant to refer back to the words of the prohibition, the little upbeat gets in the way, since we can't recall the word ni if the orchestra is playing da-da, unless, of course, the character had been stuttering, and our hero Lohengrin is hardly someone to stutter. So instead of a recollection of specific words, Wagner has transformed the theme into a more gestural fanfare of doom. It's as if a mighty instrumental choir now taunts Ilze with a spiteful rendition of her promise not to ask the question. Lohengrin's actual words, therefore, recede into the background. So rather than repeat a prohibition, the Frageverbot now issues a kind of overt threat about the ban. The theme still communicates just as vividly, but in a far more implicit way than the word reminiscence would suggest. By manipulating the app, you can grasp and explore these kinds of details along with many other features. For example, we can observe and hear how Wagner's orchestration of themes is constantly on the move and is consistently varied. We can also see whether the X segment begins on a solid root position chord or on a more tottering and unsteady second inversion, or whether the Y segment ends on a consonant chord or on a dissonance to experience something less than definitive. All these distinctive features combine to enable a hands-on familiarity with Wagner's compositional methods. Since we now have easy access to the subtle emotional effects that his recurrence themes are able to craft. If we think about Wagner's obsessive transformations of his themes and motives as belonging to a venerable tradition of variation techniques, we can see how the manipulation of musical paradigms developed for the Lohengrin TimeMachine could be applied fruitfully to a huge range of musical styles and genres, from patterns of imitation in Renaissance polyphony, to fugues and concertos by J.S. Bach, to symphonic composition by Beethoven and Brahms, into works by 20th century composers such as Debussy, Bartók, and Berg, just to name a few of the possibilities. For a long time, music analysis has been the province of specialists who can read scores and hear the music in their heads. The situation is rather different from the accessibility of research in fields such as literary study or the history of art, where one can simply quote some words or reproduce an image. With the technological advances of the Lohengrin TimeMachine, it might not be too soon to hope that a close examination of even very sophisticated kinds of music can be made accessible, as well as pleasurable, to a wide range of interested listeners. Thanks for watching.